Class is back in session. Hello and welcome. This is your humble professor at the Conservative College. They call me Professor Toto because just like that little dog Toto in The Wizard of Oz, I love pulling the curtain back on the fake Wizard of Oz, the Wizard of Lies, CNN, Fox News, the lamestream media, fake news. And here is where we try to make it all make sense for you, my fellow patriots, conservatives around the United States that loves this great nation and this great Constitution. But tonight, many of you are worried. You're worried about the presidential election. You're worried because you know that our man won. You know it. And but yet it looks bad, especially if you turn on CNN and all the other guys. They are portraying an image just like the Wizard of Oz portrayed an image on a great big screen of this great big face, this big booming voice. But when Toto pulled the curtain back, it was just a little feeble old man. You can call Joe Biden, Mr. Biden, whatever you want to call him. You can project him on the screen of CNN as president-elect all day long. All you're projecting is a lie. Some of us have been awakened to see past the lies. But still, that doesn't take away from many of your concerns, your fears. Maybe they're growing more and more every day as your neighbors and your family is getting more used to calling Joe Biden president-elect. And as you're hearing this more and more, you feel maybe even your own self starting to wonder how this is going to turn out. This lesson is for you. I want to sum it up by saying this: trust the Constitution. Now, the rest of this lesson is founded upon the fact that you are a person of faith. Now, if you're not a person of faith, then what I'm about to say won't line up with your worldview. I believe that there was something called the Word of God that was divinely written by imperfect men. Men that probably did not even live everything that the Spirit of God was writing through them. They were just human instruments for a divine book. That book has lasted for 4,000 years, not in its current form, but in bits and pieces, and it has survived the test of time. Why? It's divine. It was written by men that are not divine, but what spoke through them was. I feel the same way about the United States Constitution. I believe the United States of America, this great North America that sit over here for thousands of years, undiscovered. Before this land was discovered, it was just sitting here with a small handful of people, smaller than the population of New Orleans, Louisiana, on this great continent. So it is my belief and faith that God Himself had this land discovered for a specific purpose at the specific time that it was found. Now, if you're not overly religious, I'll move on to the next point. Now, the men that formed the Constitution, they were not perfect men. Some of them may not have even been good men. We definitely know that they did not live up to the very principles that they even wrote about in the Constitution. What do I mean by that? Plain and simple. They wrote in the Constitution by divine influence, I believe, that all men are created equal before God. And yet we know they were slave owners. The horrible history of slavery, they were part of it. But yet they wrote a document that the very principle went contrary to the very things they practice. How can that be? Because I believe a divine document was written by men that failed to live up to the divinity of the principles in that document. So with that said, when they wrote the United States Constitution, by divine influence of my own opinion, that document was written to control you and I from our own selves. What do I mean by that? Dr. O.S. Ganesh wrote in his book a statement that is so true. He said, you can never write enough laws to bring virtue to mankind. The Constitution is only as good as our faith in the virtue of it. So the Constitution was written to protect us from our own selves, because the founders that wrote this evidently knew by divine providence that there would be a day in our future when religion would not be protected in this great nation. It was unfathomable when they wrote the Constitution, but they were writing a document to protect us from devolving, because all of humanity devolves. It does not evolve, as we've been taught. You look at society from Rome to Greece to all the Mesopotamian empires, you will find the same story over and over and over. Man rises, man falls. The reason the Bible does not have to be updated is because God never changes and the nature of man never changes. We go up, we go down. The Constitution was written for a people, and a people that was going up. If you look at even our buildings back then, our lifestyles, our customs, our respect for one another, our respect for institutions, we were a people that were evolving as a society. But our founders knew their history. They knew the ebb and flow of mankind. This Constitution was written to protect us from the flow downward. And it has already begun. So they wrote in the Constitution that government shall make no law infringing upon religion in any shape, form, or fashion. They did that to protect us against this rising tide of anti-religion, anti-God. The next thing, Article 2 of the Constitution, they put that in there because they knew there would come a people, a generation that did not know their history. They did not know what happens to a people that is not armed with a well-armed militia. So, they protected us against our own rationale, our own changing customs and times. If you listen to someone argue for gun control, their argument is very appealing. The world is in trouble. People are shooting people. I get your argument, but the problem is this. The Constitution is the bedrock that protects us against our own rationale, because our founders, by divine providence, knew our history. They knew that we would rationalize the way that other societies did to give the government more and more control. Freedom can only be preserved when we understand this Constitution. It's what keeps us free. So with all of that said, and I won't continue with a constitutional lesson, but I want to bring it to the election. The founders feared majority rule. Now you may think that we live in a democracy, but we do not. Thank God we don't live in a democracy. We live in something much better. We live in a republic, or a representative democracy. In a democracy, majority rules. In a republic, your representatives rule. That's why we have the House of Representatives. The majority is the last thing that you want ruling. I'll give you an example. You're standing on the street corner with maybe a group like the Sons of Tyranny, which is a white hate group, or Black Lives Matter, which is another hate group. You're standing with one of these groups and they get you emotionally worked up. The crowd is going crazy and you join right in. The crowd is always wrong. The majority is not right. Why? Because the majority, most of the time, is ill-informed. They're not educated. They don't know the truth of the matter. They go with the emotions of the moment. Our founders never wanted this nation to be mob rule or majority rule. That's why they created the Electoral College. It protects us from one mob mentality ruling all of the states in this great union. They created this Electoral College to protect this nation from a mob mentality. So, the presidential election now is in great peril, it looks like. Our president, Donald J. Trump, has refused to concede the election. I explained to you in a previous video, you need to watch it. It's entitled, What Happens If Donald Trump Does Not Concede? We left the arena of a normal election. In a normal election, there's enough difference that there is no fraud suspected, at least not enough to change an election. And we call the election on the media. We're all fine with that. For example, in 2016, Hillary Clinton did not contest the election. It was called, we all went with it. This is different. There's a contested election. It is moved outside of normalcy. Now it is moved into another area called constitutional law. You can trust this old document. It was put in place foreseeing a time like this when an election would have so much fraud, irregularity, that they needed a stopgap measure to protect us from mob rule, majority rule, to protect us from our own self. The day will soon come when this process will play itself out. It's running against the clock. The Constitution has set a deadline for December the 14th. That's our deadline. That's when we must have a certified election. It's going to be very difficult if those certifications are tied up in court. And trust me, they will be if I know Mr. Trump. Now, there's a caveat to all of this that would prove it all wrong if he concedes the election. At that moment, that is surrender. You don't exhaust your legal resources. But we're running against the clock, December the 14th. Now, Mr. Trump, at the 14th, if we do not have that slate of electors certified, and they can't be if they're contested, now we come against another deadline. On January the 3rd, the House of Representatives, the new House, will be sworn in. We must have a president by Inauguration Day. And I've explained all this, so I'm not going to repeat it in this video. Make sure you watch my video, What Happens If Donald Trump Does Not Concede? At the end of this process, the Constitution protects you and me and the president. You can trust in the Constitution. So quit being nervous. Don't be scared. This Constitution is working in the background, just like the Word of God works in the background. When the whole world's falling apart, that old book that your granny had on the coffee table is still a bedrock for humanity. The Constitution is a bedrock for every citizen of these great United States. God bless you, and may God bless America.